All right, good soggy morning to you, pre-calculus. So here's the video I promised you guys, again outlining what you will be required to know for the upcoming summative assessment for Chapter 1. Now, I did this in class, but I wanted to just make a separate video kind of highlighting that. I put up the links to the last class's videos up on the Google Classroom. So the same stuff I had mentioned there is just kind of summarized in this video, but I just wanted to have it again in multiple places just in case you happen to have didn't watch that video, or you might have been going to the bathroom when I was talking or whatever. So here we go, another place just to kind of highlight what you need to know for the exam. So in Chapter 1, we were just doing is our algebra review, which was mostly dealing with functions. So really, you can just think of Chapter 1 as functions. All right, so what is it that we did, and what is it that's going to be required of me to do? So first thing is evaluating functions. So whether it's plugging in a number or plugging in an expression. So an example of kind of some of the harder questions that you did were the ones that were looking like this. So you may have run across this already in the review. That's kind of like, oh, I'm simplifying the expression. They gave me a function. I got to do all that. Expanding, you are evaluating a function there. So this is one of those harder examples, but something kind of like that. Then also too, I'll put that in here. We were simplifying functions. So again, that goes to what we were doing here. Then we moved into the next section, which was talking about transformations. So this involved more looking at the graphs of the functions. So remember, you're moving up, down, left, right. Okay. Then you had your stretching and compressing, or shrinking. And then you had reflections. So looking at a function, being able to tell what transformations is it undergoing, so then that way I can describe the correct sequence in order to be able to make the new graph. So also be able to not just describe, but also do the actual transformation. So if you had to make the new graph, how would you go about doing that? So those are things that we did in that section with transformations. Then we moved into operations. So operations, so adding functions, subtracting functions, multiplying, dividing, and the notation. So that was more important than anything. So I did a separate video where I just highlighted function notation. So for example, and I'll put one here. So for example, what does it mean when I write f minus g of x? So remember that that is just the same as me saying, oh, f of x minus g of x. So not that this is, oh, subtract f and g and then multiply by x. So I'm just bringing that up. Just that's what I mean by notation. So if it's written in a different way, oh, I don't know what that means. If you ask me during the test, I cannot answer you at this point. That's actually part of the question is do you understand the notation? Also under operations, we learned about the composition function. So, or not composition function, but the composition operation. So that was the open dot. So know the difference between if I see f times g of x versus if I see this. These are different. These are not the same thing. They don't mean the same thing. So go back and look at that. And so if you had difficulties with this, which I know some of you did, go back, review that part. So compositions with as an operation. Then we had our inverse section. So finding inverses. So how do I find the inverse function? How do I prove that two functions are inverses of one another? This is where we also learned of that term one-to-one. What does that mean? And how does it relate to inverse functions? So when we find inverses and proving inverses, remember the different ways to go about doing that. So we can either graph, or we could look at it algebraically, or I can look at it using numbers. So when I ask you to prove or to find an inverse, it is totally up to you how you do it. So this is why we learned all those different methods, to hopefully at this point you've figured out a method that suits you best. Okay. And then finally, the last part, which was with regression. So remember that was really just mainly using the calculator, and our job was more of looking at interpretations of those values. So when we get that line of best fit, so how do I know it's a good fit? How do I know what kind of relationship is happening between the two variables? So relationship. Is it strong? Weak? None? Okay. And then extrapolation. So using our line to give us or predict the future. Okay. So, and how good is that? Or how reliable is that prediction? So we talked about that in class and was in one of our videos also. So again, go back, refer to those previous notes. How do I know that? Okay, there's actually one thing I did forget to mention in the beginning here with the beginning part under that very first section. So I'm going to shoehorn it in here. So apologies for that, is finding the domain of a function. And I did a very separate video on this right at the beginning of the course, the things to look out for to help you determine the domain of the function. And when we do domain, the different ways we can write the domain. I could write the domain verbally. I could write it in set notation. I can write it in interval notation. It is, again, completely up to you how you do it. But you should be familiar with the different ways of presenting or how the information can be presented to you. So especially if you get a multiple choice question, it may not be in the format you would write the answer, but you should be able to read it and understand, oh yeah, that's equivalent to what I want to say. Now in a short response question, you can answer it however you want. Okay, so this overall is what you should be responsible for. Oops, let me just make sure so we can see it all. There we go. So this is all the stuff that we covered in chapter 1, which can and will appear. Not everything's going to all appear, but there's going to be some questions that maybe can do both at the same time. So do expect that you will be kind of testing on each of these. All right, so hopefully that kind of clears up what will appear on the exam. Again, I did this in class, but I just wanted to make sure I have a separate video to kind of illustrate this idea here for you. And if you found this again to be useful, please hit a like on the video, and I will see you guys on the next video.